Okay, so this is the second lecture in the chapter on culture. In the previous lecture, we were, or I was, talking about what culture was. And specifically, we've gotten to, I've been talking about the two elements of culture. You have the stuff and the non-stuff, the material and the non-material. Be prepared to be able to identify specific examples of both of those. Specific examples, say, of American culture might be muscle trucks. When my classes were face to face, I would ask students to write down, sort of on the spot. I would have them write down an example of material and non-material American culture, and I might get examples like picket fences, or muscle trucks, or tanning beds, or apple pie, baseball, football, these kinds of things. And material culture, people would say, oh gosh, I could get all kinds of things like, oh, I would get patriotism and obesity and English are examples of non-material culture. So be able to identify at least the fundamental distinction that material is your stuff and non-material are your ways of being. And I want to talk more a little bit about that in the next two slides. I left off when we ended here, we were talking about the distinction between ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. Because these are very important concepts, I want to spend a little bit more time talking about them. There's a great cartoon here that I want to show you sort of by way of illustration. And so ethnocentrism is it's the belief, it's a cultural centeredness. It's a belief that my culture is right and my culture is best. Might even use an example of maybe team spirit or even patriotism as a kind of ethnocentrism, because it says that my way is good, and my way is good. Cultural relativism, though, is sort of the other side of that, and it argues that in order to fully understand another culture, I have to understand that culture from their perspective. There are good things and bad things about both ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. But as you can kind of see here in this video, right, you have two women, and they are looking through the lens of their own culture, and they're looking at behaviors of another culture, and they're being ethnocentric. These are ethnocentric perspectives. One woman says, everything covered but her eyes, what a cruel male-dominated culture. And the other woman says, nothing covered but her eyes, what a cruel male-dominated culture. Both of them are coming from different perspectives. One culture says that women should be able to show whatever they want to show. That is their value, that is their belief, and their behavior. Then what you see, right? Their material culture that they surround themselves is a reflection of what they believe. The other says that no, women should be covered and protected because they're sacred. Only their body should be seen by the men closest to them. This is a way of protection. And so we will interact with these other cultures from a very judgmental perspective. So one thing that I ask you that it's important to point out about ethnocentrism and cultural relativism is they have both goods and bads. There's both good things and bad things about being ethnocentric and about being culturally relative. And not likely, this will be a quiz question too, is what is an asset and what is a liability? What is good about believing that my culture is right? What is bad about believing that my culture is right? I'll just sort of pause there. We'll call it a pregnant pause. What might be good is that if I believe my culture is right, I will repeat it, and I will hold on to it, and I will pass it on, and I will regard it as sacred. I like to use the example of, because I live in Manhattan where everything is purple, if we woke up, tomorrow morning and everyone decided that purple was bad, right? What would happen to my town? What would happen to my community? What would happen to life as we know it, is if we all woke up tomorrow and said, this American way of life is really wrong, right? What would happen to it? It would fall apart. Some people probably think it already is falling apart. right? On the other hand, if I believe that purple is the only color, that my way of doing things is the only way of doing things, this could potentially be bad. If I believe that the way of organizing a society or the way of organizing a community or the only color worth wearing is the color that I'm wearing, and you have to wear the color that I'm wearing, this could lead to some pretty profound conflict. This could lead to war. This could lead to hurt and violence and destruction if I am so firmly entrenched that my way is right and that everyone else's way is wrong. I might try to impose my way on you, even if you don't want to, because you, after all, have your own way of doing things. Now, cultural relativism says, to be relative, to all things are relative, says, I like to say that cultural relativism is the excuse not to judge. If I can embrace a culturally relative perspective, if I can hold on, if I, instead of when I see something that's different than myself and do it different than I believe, instead of saying, boy, man, those people are crazy. Like they are like, I don't know, man, the world's falling apart. If instead of looking at a group of people who are acting differently than me from the perspective of they're wrong and I'm right, because see, if I look at them as if I'm wrong and they're right, then I believe that, you know, then we can lead to bad things. But instead, if I look at them and go, I wonder what are they, what would motivate them to act like that? Why do they think that that is the right way to be? Instead of being judgmental, I'm curious. And what I like to say is leaning into curiosity, which is also interesting because in the psychology chapter, we talk about self-actualization. One of the characteristics of a self-actualized person is a person who is curious. They're curious about themselves. They're curious about the world, because a self-actualized person is really not afraid. Ethnocentrism is kind of from the perspective of fear and don't like change. Cultural relativism approaches the world and approaches difference from the perspective of curiosity, and you might even say acceptance. And for the most part, sociologists for the most part embrace a cultural relative perspective, is curiosity and acceptance. But there comes a point where if I am exclusively accepting, and if the goal is just simply to understand why you treat your children like that, or why you cover your women up, or why you think that Jewish people are inferior, if it's just about understanding and explaining, well, shoot, you can explain anything. You can always understand, right? I mean, when Hitler's people went out and killed 4 million Jews, you know, there's all kinds of history books that explains the logic for his behavior. If I can explain it, well, I can explain anything. And you can explain why people, well, there's, for instance, this is one of my favorite, one of the simplest examples is there are faith traditions, there are religions, I believe it's called the Children of God, and they believe their ideas, right, are that the way that we experience God is through sex. So they have sex with their children because they want their children to experience God, right? We can explain that, but does that make it okay just because we can explain it? To say that it's not okay is to be judgmental, is to be ethnocentric. Is it ethnocentric to say you don't have sex with 12-year-olds? Well, it's culturally relative to say, oh, I get it. So there's a point, right? There are good and bad things. The bad thing about being ethnocentric is it'll lead to judgment and fear and war potentially and hurtfulness. But the irony is the danger, the risk of being too culturally relative, too accepting, is that we can allow people to harm each other. That can also, we can also justify war and violence and oppression. So there's good and bads about both. The good about cultural relativism, especially when we're talking about like images like this one, right? Is that, oh, I can understand why you let your women go around half naked, or, oh, I can understand why you cover yourself up, right? I mean, we can accept that instead of judge and fear and turn away. That's a good thing. There must be a point. There must be a point in which it's no longer okay to just accept things because we can explain it. And in fact, I think I said in the previous chapter, sociologists we really strive to be value neutral, to not see another group and say, oh, that's weird or that's bad or to judge them but to understand and to recognize that different groups have different values. They hold different things as importance. And there's a but at the point in which that other group begins to deny humanity or deny other groups opportunities to fully engage in the social world. That's the point where sociologists say, no, it's okay. It's okay to be ethnocentric when your ethnocentrism is around equality or